In 1185, a 24-year-old warrior stood outnumbered 3,000 to 1 on a battlefield that history said was impossible to win. Yet within minutes he had orchestrated what military scholars still call the most brilliant tactical victory in human history. Not through superior weapons or numbers, but through a mental process so advanced that witnesses described it as supernatural. This wasn't luck. This wasn't even traditional strategy. This was something far more profound, a systematic method of mental operation that Minamoto no Yoshitsune had developed for accessing cognitive abilities that most humans never even realize exist within their own minds. What happened on that battlefield revealed a mental code that completely revolutionizes how we understand the nature of genius itself, because Yoshitsune had discovered something that modern neuroscience is only beginning to understand: that the human brain contains dormant neural pathways capable of processing information at levels that appear miraculous to ordinary consciousness. The problem is that most people go through their entire lives operating at perhaps 10% of their true mental capacity, trapped in thinking patterns that were never designed to handle the complexity of modern challenges, while the very same mental architecture that allowed Yoshitsune to see solutions invisible to everyone else remains locked away, waiting to be activated through the precise mental disciplines he perfected over centuries ago. Right now, as you're watching this, your mind is probably running the same limited processing loops it always runs, the familiar patterns of analysis that keep you stuck in the same level of thinking that created your current problems. And you might not even realize that there's an entirely different operating system available to you. One that can transform not just how you solve problems, but how you perceive reality itself. What I'm about to share isn't another self-help technique or productivity hack. It's the systematic unlocking of mental capabilities that will make your current way of thinking seem like using a calculator when you could be using a supercomputer. And the transformation begins the moment you understand that genius isn't a talent you either have or don't have. It's a state of mental organization that can be learned, practiced, and mastered by anyone willing to apply Yoshitsune's precise methodologies. Before we go any deeper into this ancient mental technology, I want you to help me understand exactly where you are in your own journey of mental development, because the most powerful transformations happen when we address the specific barriers you're facing right now. Hit that like button to let me know this resonates with you. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue exploring these advanced mental techniques. And most importantly, comment below with this phrase, "I'm ready to unlock my hidden genius." And then tell me about one specific area of your life where you feel like your thinking gets stuck in the same patterns over and over again, because your honest response will help me create future content that directly addresses the mental limitations our entire community is working to overcome. And when you share your struggle, you're actually helping others who are dealing with the exact same invisible barriers to realize they're not alone in this journey. The discovery that changed everything for me happened during a period when I was completely overwhelmed by a complex business decision that seemed to have no good options, spending weeks analyzing the same information repeatedly without making any real progress, feeling like my mind was running in circles while the deadline approached and the pressure mounted. I had always considered myself reasonably intelligent, but this situation revealed something deeply unsettling about my mental processes, that despite all my education and experience, when faced with true complexity, my thinking became rigid, repetitive, and ultimately ineffective. It was during this mental crisis that I first encountered Yoshitsune's approach to what ancient Japanese philosophy calls mind mastery. Not the popular meditation techniques or mindfulness practices that everyone talks about, but a sophisticated system for reorganizing consciousness itself to access what he called the state of supernatural perception. Yoshitsune understood that ordinary thinking operates through what we might call linear processing, where the mind tackles problems sequentially, analyzing one element at a time, building conclusions step by step. But this approach, while useful for simple problems, completely breaks down when dealing with the multi-dimensional complexity that characterizes most real-world challenges. His mental code was based on a radically different approach, what he called simultaneous awareness processing, where instead of thinking through problems, you learn to think around them, above them, and through them all at once, creating a kind of mental hologram that reveals solutions that simply cannot be seen from any single analytical perspective. The first principle of Yoshitsune's mental code is what he called pattern dissolution, the systematic dismantling of the automatic thought patterns that keep your mind trapped in familiar grooves of analysis. Most people don't realize that their thinking follows the same predictable pathways day after day, year after year, creating mental ruts so deep that new possibilities become literally invisible to them. Yoshitsune discovered that breakthrough thinking requires first breaking free from these unconscious mental habits, and he developed specific exercises for recognizing when your mind has slipped into automatic mode and techniques for instantly shifting into what he called fluid awareness, a state where your consciousness becomes adaptable enough to perceive solutions that were always there, but hidden by the rigidity of conventional thinking patterns. The second principle involves what he termed dimensional expansion, the ability to simultaneously hold multiple perspectives on any situation without your mind collapsing into the either-or thinking that characterizes most human analysis. When Yoshitsune looked at that impossible battlefield, he wasn't seeing it from his position as an outnumbered warrior. He was simultaneously seeing it from the perspective of his enemies, from the viewpoint of the terrain itself, from the angle of time and weather patterns, from the psychological dimension of morale and fear, creating a comprehensive understanding that revealed tactical possibilities invisible to single perspective analysis. This isn't abstract philosophy. This is a trainable mental skill that you can begin developing immediately by practicing what he called perspective multiplexing, consciously shifting your viewpoint on any problem through at least 5 different dimensional lenses before allowing your mind to settle on any conclusion. The third principle, and perhaps the most revolutionary, is what Yoshitsune called temporal transcendence, the ability to think outside the normal constraints of linear time that trap most people in reactive rather than creative mental modes. Most human thinking is dominated by either past-based analysis, where you try to solve current problems using solutions that worked before, or future-based anxiety, where you become paralyzed by trying to predict and control outcomes that haven't happened yet. Yoshitsune's approach transcends this temporal trap by training the mind to operate in what he called the eternal present, a state of consciousness where past wisdom and future possibilities converge in the immediate moment of decision, allowing for solutions that are both grounded in experience and innovative beyond anything your linear thinking could generate. The practical application of these principles begins with understanding that your current mental operating system, while functional for basic tasks, is simply inadequate for the level of challenges you face in complex modern life. Just as upgrading your computer's operating system suddenly makes new software possible, upgrading your mental operating system through Yoshitsune's methods opens cognitive capabilities that transform not just your problem-solving abilities, but your entire relationship with reality itself. In your personal life, this means developing the ability to see relationship conflicts not as problems to be solved through compromise or victory, but as opportunities to transcend the limited perspectives that created the conflict in the first place, accessing solutions that honor everyone involved while moving the entire dynamic to a higher level of functioning. Professionally, it means approaching business challenges not through conventional competitive analysis, but through the kind of dimensional thinking that reveals collaborative possibilities hidden beneath surface-level competition, creating value in ways that benefit all stakeholders while positioning you as someone who operates at a fundamentally different level of strategic awareness. Intellectually, it means transforming your learning process from information accumulation to wisdom integration, where new knowledge doesn't just add to what you already know, but reorganizes your entire understanding in ways that make you progressively more capable of recognizing patterns and possibilities that remain invisible to conventional thinking. The transformation isn't immediate, because your brain has been running its current operating system for years or decades, and shifting to Yoshitsune's approach requires rewiring neural pathways that have become deeply ingrained through repetitive use. However, the changes begin almost immediately once you start applying his methods consistently, beginning with what students of his system call breakthrough moments, sudden flashes of clarity where you see solutions to problems that have been bothering you for months or years, followed by periods where your mind feels more flexible and creative in general, and eventually evolving into a permanent upgrade in your baseline cognitive functioning that makes your previous thinking seem slow and limited by comparison. The resistance you'll face comes not from the difficulty of the techniques themselves, but from the mind's natural tendency to return to familiar patterns even when those patterns are clearly inadequate, which is why Yoshitsune emphasized the importance of what he called practice beyond comfort, consistently pushing your mental boundaries even when your automatic mind wants to retreat to the safety of known approaches. This resistance manifests in predictable ways, starting with what he identified as comfort zone gravity, the powerful psychological force that keeps pulling your consciousness back toward familiar thinking patterns, even after you've experienced the superior results of his advanced methods. You might find yourself solving a complex problem using dimensional expansion, experiencing the breakthrough clarity that comes from multiple perspective analysis, only to discover that the next day your mind has automatically reverted to single perspective thinking without you even realizing it happened. Yoshitsune understood this tendency intimately, which is why he developed what he called persistence protocols, systematic methods for recognizing when your mind has slipped back into automatic mode and techniques for instantly re-engaging the advanced cognitive processes that produce supernatural results. The key insight he discovered is that the brain treats new thinking patterns like foreign software, initially resisting their installation because they require more energy and attention than the familiar automated processes that have been running for years. However, once these new patterns become established through consistent practice, they actually require less mental energy than the old patterns, because they're so much more efficient at processing complex information and generating effective solutions. This is why students of his system report that after several months of dedicated practice, thinking at genius level becomes easier and more natural than their previous limited cognitive functioning, like upgrading from a bicycle to a sports car and discovering that traveling at high speeds actually requires less effort than struggling up hills in low gear. The fourth principle of Yoshitsune's mental code involves what he called energy optimization, the understanding that supernatural genius isn't about forcing your mind to work harder, but about aligning your cognitive processes with the natural intelligence that flows through all existence when mental resistance is dissolved. Most people exhaust themselves mentally because they're constantly fighting against their own thinking patterns, trying to force solutions through sheer willpower, rather than learning to work with the inherent problem-solving intelligence that emerges when the mind is properly organized. Yoshitsune discovered that when consciousness is aligned through his methods, complex problems begin solving themselves through what appears to be intuitive guidance, but is actually the result of accessing cognitive capabilities that operate below the threshold of ordinary awareness. This doesn't mean becoming passive or waiting for inspiration to strike. It means learning to engage problems with the kind of relaxed intensity that allows your full mental resources to participate in the solution process rather than just the narrow analytical functions that most people mistake for their entire intelligence. The practical development of this capability begins with what he called stress dissolution practices, specific techniques for releasing the mental tension that blocks access to your deeper cognitive resources. When you approach any challenging situation, your first priority isn't analyzing the problem. It's ensuring that your consciousness is in the optimal state for perceiving solutions that exist beyond the reach of stressed, contracted thinking. This involves learning to recognize the subtle signs that your mind has shifted into defensive mode, where it can only see problems, limitations, and reasons why things won't work, and developing the ability to consciously return to what he called receptive awareness, where your intelligence becomes open to possibilities that weren't visible from the contracted state. The fifth principle, which Yoshitsune considered the master key to all the others, is what he called identity transcendence. The recognition that your current sense of who you are and what you're capable of is actually the primary limitation preventing you from accessing your full mental potential. Most people live their entire lives trapped inside a self-concept that was formed during childhood and adolescence, when their understanding of their own capabilities was necessarily limited by their experience and development. This fixed identity operates like a mental straitjacket, automatically filtering out evidence of capabilities that don't match your established self-image and preventing you from even attempting to develop skills that seem inconsistent with who you think you are. Yoshitsune's breakthrough insight was that genius-level thinking becomes accessible the moment you stop identifying with your current mental limitations and begin operating from the recognition that consciousness itself is infinitely adaptable and expandable. This doesn't mean developing an inflated ego or pretending to be someone you're not. It means recognizing that what you call yourself is actually just a collection of learned patterns that can be updated and expanded as you grow in understanding and capability. The transformation process involves systematically identifying the limiting beliefs about your own intelligence that keep you playing small mentally, and then proving to yourself through direct experience that these limitations were never real in the first place. When you begin approaching challenging situations from the assumption that you're capable of finding solutions, even when you don't currently see how, your mind automatically begins accessing cognitive resources that were always available but remained dormant because you never asked them to activate. The sixth principle focuses on what Yoshitsune called collaborative intelligence, the understanding that supernatural genius isn't about becoming a mental Superman isolated in your own brilliance, but about learning to access the collective wisdom that becomes available when you align your individual consciousness with the larger intelligence that connects all minds. This might sound mystical, but it's actually quite practical. involving specific techniques for drawing insights and solutions from sources beyond your personal knowledge and experience. When you're working on any complex challenge, instead of relying solely on what you already know, you learn to pose questions to the larger field of human understanding and remain open to receiving insights that seem to come from beyond your individual thinking process. This collaborative approach doesn't require believing in anything supernatural. It simply involves recognizing that consciousness appears to be more interconnected than our conventional individualistic worldview suggests, and learning to work with these connections rather than ignoring them. Students of this principle report regularly receiving exactly the information they need to solve problems through seemingly coincidental conversations, unexpected discoveries, or sudden insights that arrive just when they're most needed. The systematic application of all 6 principles creates what Yoshitsune called the genius cascade, a state where breakthrough thinking becomes your normal mode of operation, rather than a rare occurrence that happens by accident. In this state, you begin to notice that complex problems often contain their own solutions hidden in plain sight, waiting to be recognized by a mind that's organized to perceive rather than struggle. Relationships that seemed impossible to improve suddenly reveal pathways to deeper understanding and connection when approached through dimensional thinking rather than positional analysis. Business challenges that appeared to have no good solutions begin showing collaborative possibilities that create value for everyone involved while advancing your own objectives more effectively than competitive approaches ever could. Creative projects that felt blocked by limitations suddenly open into expansive possibilities when approached through temporal transcendence rather than linear planning. Physical health challenges that seemed mysterious begin making sense when examined through the energy optimization lens that reveals how mental patterns directly influence biological functioning. Financial difficulties that felt overwhelming become manageable when addressed through the identity transcendence approach that dissolves the limiting beliefs about money and success that create scarcity in the first place. The most profound discovery that students make as they develop these capabilities is that what they thought was their fixed personality was actually just a collection of learned limitations that can be consciously upgraded and expanded. The angry person discovers they were never naturally angry. They simply never learned effective ways to process frustration. And with Yoshitsune's methods, they become naturally calm and resourceful under pressure. The anxious person realizes their worry was never protecting them from danger. It was actually preventing them from accessing the confidence and clarity that would help them navigate challenges successfully. The depressed person understands that their low mood was never an accurate reflection of reality, but rather the inevitable result of thinking patterns that focused on problems rather than possibilities. And as they apply these new mental technologies, their natural enthusiasm and optimism begin emerging automatically. This is why Yoshitsune's approach is ultimately about much more than improved problem-solving or enhanced creativity. It's about discovering who you really are when you're not limited by the unconscious mental patterns that most people mistake for their true nature. Remember, every expert in any field was once a beginner who refused to stay comfortable with their current level of capability, and developing supernatural genius through Yoshitsune's methods is simply a matter of applying this same principle to the realm of consciousness itself. The difference is that unlike learning a skill like playing piano or speaking a foreign language, upgrading your mental operating system improves every area of your life simultaneously because thinking is the foundation that determines your experience of everything else. As you begin implementing these principles, you might notice some people around you react with skepticism or even resistance to the changes they observe in your thinking and decision-making capabilities. This is completely normal, and actually a sign that you're successfully transcending the mental limitations that most people accept as permanent fixtures of human nature. Yoshitsune experienced this same phenomenon when his strategic abilities began operating at levels that seemed impossible to his contemporaries, some of whom preferred to explain his success through supernatural intervention, rather than acknowledge that he had simply developed learnable mental capabilities that they could access as well if they were willing to commit to the necessary practice. Your job isn't to convince anyone else that these methods work. It's to continue developing your own capabilities regardless of external opinions or expectations, because the results you generate will speak for themselves as you begin solving problems and creating opportunities that seemed impossible from your previous level of mental functioning. The journey of mental mastery is ultimately a journey of discovering that the limitations you thought were permanent features of reality were actually temporary restrictions created by thinking patterns that can be consciously evolved and upgraded. If everything I've shared today resonates with your desire to unlock mental capabilities you know exist within you but haven't been able to access, then I want you to take a specific action right now that will accelerate your progress on this journey. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss the advanced techniques we explore here, because what we've covered today is just the beginning of a comprehensive system that can transform every aspect of your mental functioning. More importantly, I want you to commit to implementing one specific element of Yoshitsune's approach in the next 24 hours, and then come back to this video and comment about what you discovered. Because the real transformation happens not in understanding these concepts intellectually, but in experiencing their power through direct application. And when you share your results, you inspire others in our community to take their own bold steps toward mental mastery that can literally change the trajectory of their entire life.